Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Online with the CMC, the basics of digitizing photographs. This morning, we've got Emily Doehring, our CMC intern, and Katy Egts, our metadata cataloger. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you so much, Pam. Well, welcome to our presentation on the basics of digitizing photographs. We are excited to have you all here and hope that you find our presentation informative. Please save questions until the end. Dr. Pamela Thomas will monitor the chat for any time-sensitive questions. Also, my email address is listed on the screen here. It's kegts@illinoisheartland.org if you think of any questions after the presentation. Also, the slides with our notes for this presentation will be uploaded immediately after the presentation. Slides without notes are currently downloadable through L2. This presentation is also being recorded, and the recording will be emailed to you once it's available. We just want to introduce ourselves real quick. I am Katy Egts. I'm the metadata cataloger here at the CMC. I graduated from the University of Illinois with my MLIS and have been a cataloger for about 3.5 years.
And hello, my name is Emily. I'm an MSLIS student at the University of Illinois and a 2022 summer intern at the CMC, where I'm getting practical experience with MARC cataloging and learning about different metadata careers.
We did just want to give you a disclaimer at the beginning of our presentation here. The digitizing photographs is a complex process with many variables and methods, and what works for one library might not work for another. In this presentation, we intend to provide you with a brief overview of the subject, introduce a few different methods, and present a few tips and tricks we've learned along the way. That being said, neither of us are true experts in the field, and we are very much still in the learning process too. We will be providing links to additional resources at the end of the presentation. Also, just as a side note, digitization is a difficult word to say, and we will probably stumble over it occasionally, so please be patient and kind with us. So for today's agenda, we will be giving an introduction to photograph digitization, sort of what is it, why digitize, initial considerations, how to digitize photographs, adding metadata, and after digitization. And then there will be works cited and slides at the end. So what is photograph digitization? Well, photograph digitization is when you use a scanner or digital camera to take a picture of a physical or analog photograph and turn it into a computer file, which can then be manipulated, converted, compressed, and potentially stored indefinitely. And I put a little asterisk there after indefinitely, just because the storage of the indefinite storage of a digitized file is predicated on active stewardship of that file. So it's not necessarily preserved until you make actions to preserve that file. And then before we kind of get ahead, we wanted to introduce some key terminology. Digitization, or sometimes called reformatting, is the act of taking a physical or analog object like a photograph and turning it into a computer file. Preservation refers to a variety of acts that ensure an item, whether digital or analog, will remain intact and accessible for the future. Digitizing photographs alone is not a form of preservation, as efforts have not been made to preserve the original analog object. Similarly, digitizing the photograph alone also does not ensure that the digital surrogate image has been preserved. Again, efforts to preserve the digital surrogate image would include deliberate planning and proper stewardship of the file so that it will remain accessible in the future. So we just kind of wanted to point out there that preservation and digitizing are not necessarily the same things, although they often do go hand in hand. And then digital preservation is the act of ensuring that a born digital item is maintained and made accessible for the future. And digital preservation is sometimes confused with photograph digitization, where an analog photograph is made digital, but is actually a specific form of preservation that deals exclusively with born digital items. And then what is a born digital item, you may ask? It's an item that was first captured or created as a computer file and not a physical or analog form. So digital cameras or word processors will create born digital files, whereas a Polaroid camera or a camera with a film roll or a typewriter will create an analog or physical item first. And then an analog item is just an item that was first captured or created as a physical object. And then digital surrogate is a digital item or file created from the digitization of an analog item. And it's important to remember when digitizing an item that the scan or image of that item, of that original analog item, is considered a separate and different item and brings with it its own metadata. For instance, the date field or element for an analog item might refer to the date that the photograph was first taken, which could be 1924 or 1968, whatever the date was that the photograph was taken. Whereas a date field for a digital surrogate might refer to the date it was created, which means when it was digitized, which could be 2021, a future year. And then although it's not best practice in terms of preservation standards, it's not uncommon to see a kind of hybrid record or a forest digital surrogate, which contains both metadata pertaining to both digital surrogates and the analog item. So you might, for instance, see two metadata fields for date, one called date original, which would be the date the analog photograph was taken, and then digital date, which is the creation date of the digital surrogate. So it's not uncommon to see a bib record with metadata for both, although it's not technically best practice, but you do see it a lot.
So now we're going to move on to asking why digitize? Why should you digitize your library's photograph collection? So there are a lot of benefits to digitizing your photographs. Next slide, please. The most obvious benefit is the security that digitization can offer you. By having digital copies of your photos, you can drastically reduce the risk of a total loss of your photograph collection in the case of a physical disaster, such as like a flood or a fire. And once your collection has been properly digitized and uploaded into a repository or digital library, you can allow your patrons to view your collection as much as they want virtually without causing damage to the physical collection. So reducing the amount of handling that your photographs undergo will extend their life by decreasing harmful environmental exposures, such as fingerprints, light exposure, accidental spills, and other potential hazards. Another huge benefit of digitization is that it increases the accessibility of your materials. Photographs that might otherwise be hidden away in an archival closet or forgotten by the community can often see an increase in circulation and use online. Digitization can often help libraries combat the out of sight, out of mind problem by creating better accessibility and awareness of the collection's existence. And finally, digitization makes your photographs more relevant to your community. Most of us are online all the time these days, and our patrons increasingly expect to be able to access library content through the internet. So it's a smart move to try to meet these expectations and stay current and relevant. However, you might be wondering, doesn't digitization remove context from the original? And yeah, sort of. All digital surrogates lack the ability to be physically held in your hand like a physical object, and they're stored at a completely different medium from the original. But that's kind of the point. A digital surrogate is not the same as a physical photograph, and we shouldn't treat them as identical duplicates. But in creating high quality digital surrogates and supplementing those surrogates with high quality metadata, you can ensure that the surrogate retains as much of the context of the original as possible. So it's important to remember that digital surrogacy doesn't diminish the value of the original photograph. So please don't throw out your originals after digitizing your photos. Later on in the presentation today, we'll talk a little bit about how to care for your physical collection after digitization. Digitization just gives us more options for long-term access and preservation of the originals.
So before moving on, we did want to address some initial considerations you might have before undertaking a digitization project. These were mostly found on a Library of Congress website, which we'll list in 2 slides from now. And we just wanted to kind of go over them a little bit, just because we thought they were really good questions that you might want to ask before diving into a big project like this. So the first would be, what is the purpose of this digitization project? And also, who do you intend to view and use these the digital surrogates? Second would be, how do you intend to present the digital surrogates? So what platform or software or repository are you planning to use? And how will the digital surrogate files be stored? 3 is what effect or harm will the digitization process have on the original analog collection? And what do you intend to do with your original analog collection after it has been digitized? As we said before, it's good practice to not get rid of that original collection. So what is your plan to maintain it? 4 would be, what is your budget for this project? And does this budget allow for additional training, equipment, staff, and time, or staff time? Number 5 is, what is your time frame for completion? Number 6 is, what different material sizes, material types, sizes, and conditions are present in the analog collection. And knowing this might help you determine the right kind of equipment to buy or use in your project. Number 7 is, do you have a long-term plan for how to provide adequate stewardship of this collection for the future, both for the digital and analog collection? And then also, will certain staff members or staff positions always be assigned to its maintenance? Do you have the funding to be able to buy newer and or replace older technology to house these digital files? So these were just some questions. There are many, many more questions that we recommend considering before diving into a project listed here at the preservation guidelines for digitizing library materials from the Library of Congress. So you now might be wondering, how do you digitize photos? What is the process? Well, we've broken it down into 6 steps and some tips and tricks along the way. So before actually digitizing anything, it's important to know what condition your collection is in and identify and hopefully remedy any problem pieces or issues. So a few conditions you might want to look out for in your analog photographs might be cracked photographs that will need to be flattened, tears in paper and or text longer than 1/4 inch, folds or creases, acidic or damaging housing that needs to be replaced, and restrictive, and that restrictive would be a book that opens less than 90 degrees or loose book joints, so books that open more than 180 degrees. And all of these are things that you should try to mend prior to digitization, if possible. So if any of your, even if you have some of these issues in your collection, you might want to, before moving forward, consider excluding some of the photographs from your collection. So if any of your photographs have one or more of these conditions, you might want to consider excluding them, or using equipment that causes less wear and tear, such as a digital camera to capture the image. So some of those reasons you might want to exclude a photograph might be that the paper is acidic, fragile, brittle, torn, missing pieces, sticky, or stuck to something. That the paper with iron gall ink or common ink has eaten into the page. Books with severe leather deterioration or rot, or missing pages. Letter copy books with very thin and acidic paper, such as carbon copy correspondence and some tracing paper drawings and plans, and photographs that are separating from the mount or support. And also photographs that are curled, bent, creased, folded, wrinkled, cockled, or cracked. So these are some reasons you might want to exclude them from your project if the damage is significant enough, or again, try to remedy that damage if possible. So next step 3, is you want to choose your equipment. So as we said at the beginning, there are lots of different methods and equipment that can be used to digitize analog items. And what works for one library might not work for another. So here is a list of most common types of equipment used in the scanning or capturing process of digitization. So first would be digital cameras. If you're going to use a digital camera, we recommend using one that is between 100 to 150 million pixels, and sensors with very high quality lenses. Digital cameras are a good option for larger or irregular shaped items and items that can't be flattened. The drawback to digital cameras is that the sensors in a digital camera cannot see color, and they use microcolor filters, which can result in reduced resolution and sometimes imperfect color. That being said, the imperfection is often very, very minimal. So digital cameras are often a really good option to use, especially if your budget is a little bit smaller. Second would be planetary scanners. This has 2 methods of capture for an image. Either the sensor moves in the camera head, or the sensor remains stationary and an object moves under the camera, both scanning the image one line at a time. The drawback to these is that they can capture images in very high quality resolution, but they take a little longer to do so, and can only really be used for materials that can be held down flat during the long exposure cycle. Number 3 would be flatbed scanners. These are the most common scanner type found and used. They are fast, provide high resolution, and are easy to use. They're also versatile, and they can scan film, documents, photographs, slides, etc. The drawback is that the federal agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, or FADGI, usually does not recommend using these, as there is more accurate technology available, but we think this applies more to digitization centers and preservation departments. For most public school or smaller libraries, a flatbed scanner is more than adequate and very commonly used. Fourth, we have a drum scanner. These work by securing the original item to a surface of a drum. As you can see here on the right, there's that image of the drum scanner. You secure it generally with tape. The drum then spins at a high speed, and individual pixels are captured through a focused lens one at a time as the drum spins. This produces a very high quality scan. The drawback, though, is that there is significant risk to the original as it spins attached to the drum, and the scanners are quite slow. So the FADGI therefore does not recommend using this type of equipment in any kind of cultural heritage digitization projects. Again, you just risk your originals if you use this kind of scanner. And then lastly, we just wanted to make a note about lenses, that high quality lenses are essential when digitizing items. Apochromatic lenses, macro lenses, and lenses designed specifically for digital flat field imaging are generally better than upper lenses. And also, as lenses become available in higher pixels, the quality of the lens will become more important in actual system resolution, because the system or the resolution of digital cameras and scanners may be limited by the performance of a lens. So you might get to the point where you bought a very expensive piece of equipment, but if the lens isn't high quality, your image will be the resolution of your image will be a little less than what you'd want it to be. And we did just want to put a slide in here, even though we're not quite talking about it yet, that prior to digitization, it is recommended or best practice to collect all desired metadata concerning the analog item. But again, we will talk about metadata collection and what kind of metadata to include further on in the presentation. So choosing the right scanner setting is an important part of the process of digitization and can have a positive or negative impact on the resolution or image quality and color accuracy of the scan. So here are a few common terms to help decipher and select the best scanner, the best settings in a typical scanner. So first we have bitonal. This just means it has it's a two-tone black and white scan, and these are usually suitable for printed and handwritten text. Second is palette. That just means it's a range of gray tones or colors in an image. Third is grayscale, and that's a palette of up to 256 gray tones. And this would be best for black and white photographs, and grayscale may also capture music and handwriting details better than bitonal scans will. Fourth is color, a palette of 256 to thousands of color tones. And this can be used for photographs, maps, diagrams, illustrations, and other documents. Fifth is resolution, which is a measure of sharpness of an image and how finely spaced the details are. And then lastly, and this one's probably going to be maybe not most important, but very important, is dots per inch, or DPI, or pixels per inch, PPI. And this is the measure of how many dots or pixels of color or shading are contained within 1 inch. So these terms are often used interchangeably. They mean exactly the same thing. The more dots per inch, the finer the image and the larger the file size. So those were just a few terms we wanted to go over, but here are a few setting recommendations we have for you. So for any 4x6 or 5x7 document or photo, we recommend scanning them at 300 DPI or PPI. To enlarge a 4x6 or 5x7 to 8x10 or greater, scan at 400 or to 600 DPI. And then for slides, For scanning more than a few slides, there are slide trays that fit into flatbed scanners and also standalone slide scanners. For scanning the slides, we recommend scanning them at around 1900 DPI, simply because slides are much smaller than regular photographs. And then also if you have a very small photograph, we recommend scanning that also at 1800 to 1900 DPI. And then if you have an area of your photo that you want to zoom in on, so let's say you have a class picture, but you really only need to zoom in on one person's face and you want to capture that face, scan the whole photograph at 1800 DPI and then crop to the area that you want later. And then the end steps of the digitization process, the first would be to save your photograph as either a TIFF or JPEG file. TIFF means that it's an uncompressed file. That usually means it's better quality, but it will be a much larger file. And JPEG is a compressed file. Sorry, it's a compressed file, but usually lesser quality, depending on how compressed it is. If it's not very compressed, that it's not much lesser quality, but it does take up a lot less space. And then we did just want to note that there is a type of file called JPEG 2000, which is an uncompressed JPEG file, which typically means it'll be better quality, but again, larger file size. The warning with JPEG 2000 files is that not all software programs are able to use them. So typically standard JPEG files are more popular in standard. Also, if you have the space to save your files as TIFF files, we recommend it as it retains much more of the quality and integrity of the photo. But again, for smaller or public libraries, JPEG is often an adequate file format. You won't lose too much usually unless you're compressing it a lot. And also you want to take into consideration how much storage space you have for your collection, digital storage space you have. And then lastly, we just want to have a note here in the step 1 save section, just to be careful when saving files with 4-letter extensions. That would be JPEG like JPEG or TIFF like TIFF versus their 3-letter extensions, which would be JPG or just TIF. As some digital libraries like Content DM, which the Illinois Digital Archives uses, only accept 3-letter extensions. Files can always be converted into the extension path needed. And if you have a large quantity of files that need to be converted, you can run a script in command prompt to do so. And if you need instructions on how to do that, feel free to email me. My email again is provided at the end of the presentation as well. And I can send you those instructions if you need them. The second step is to embed desired metadata into the surrogate image. Digital surrogate image. To do this, you can use software like Adobe Bridge, Adobe Photoshop, Microsoft Expression Media, CameraBits Photo Mechanic. And again, we'll talk soon about good metadata practices. It is important to remember to embed metadata like creator, description, date, and rights statements into the image, as it should then travel with the photograph wherever it goes. That being said, there are some websites like Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites especially that do strip photos of their metadata. So be careful when uploading, especially to social media. They strip it in their compression process, I think, is how that gets lost. But in most places, it shouldn't strip the metadata wherever you're taking it to, as long as it's not a social media site usually. So it's still good practice to embed that metadata. And then lastly, you want to upload into the digital library or repository with any additional collected metadata to create a bibliographic record for the item. And some digital libraries you might want to consider are Content DM, which the Illinois Digital Archives uses, and Omeka. So as mentioned earlier, best practices state that metadata should be collected prior to the digitization of a work. However, this may not be feasible or even possible for all libraries. In this section, we will discuss some best practices, best and recommended practices for how, where, and what to record in your metadata. So the first step you want to do is you want to choose a metadata schema and your types of metadata. So the schema is kind of like MARC is the schema you use for regular cataloging. Dublin Core, Primus, Mods, and VRA are some other schemas you might want to include. So Premise is the preservation metadata implementation strategies. MODS is metadata object description schema, and VRA is from the Visual Resources Association. These are just geared towards specific types of metadata you might want to include. So VRA is often used by museums. Primus is used by institutions that care a lot about the preservation side of things. We do recommend generally, if you're not a very specialized type of library, that Dublin Core either is the original or qualified Dublin Core is very common and user-friendly, and it's used by many digital collections. It's designed for digital collections for the most part. It is, however, not uncommon for institutions to borrow from multiple metadata schemas. This is called creating an application profile. So you might see Dublin Core mixed with a little bit of VRA, depending on what fields or elements you need for the metadata for your project. Secondly, you want to consider what types of metadata you want to include. Descriptive, that's usually, MARC is pretty much mostly all descriptive metadata. That includes things like title, keywords, that might be uncontrolled tags or controlled vocabulary like subject headings, and location of capture. Administrative would be things like rights statements or restrictions, provenance information, name of creator, contact information of the rights holder, and preservation metadata. And then preservation metadata is a subset of administrative metadata. That would include things like condition, equipment used during digitization, and staff involved. Structural would include things like collection name, page numbers if applicable, parent item names, especially for compound objects. And then also structural often shares some elements with many other types of metadata, so it's a little harder to define sometimes or set aside. Identify. And then lastly, technical metadata, which would include things like size, color profile, camera settings, file name, file format, and creation date. So after choosing your kind of flavor or theme that you want your metadata to fit within of the schema, you want to choose what type of metadata you want to include between descriptive, administrative, structural, and technical. And then after choosing the kinds of things you need to represent in your metadata, you're going to want to choose your metadata elements or fields. So what fields you include is very important. These are just some recommended fields that we recommend and that we've seen others recommend. There are many others, especially if you go into different types of schemas, metadata schemas. These are just some common ones, mostly pulled from Dublin Core. So you might want to include things like title, creator, date or dates. Again, kind of calling back to what we were saying earlier about you might want to have two date elements, one for creation date of the analog original, so like that 1924 original photograph date, and one for the digitization date, so that digital date. So you might want to, make that hybrid kind of record and have those two dates in there. You might also want to include place of publication, publisher, producer, distributor information, file format, file size, rights statement, contact information for rights management. This could possibly be included in the rights statement. Collection name, identifiers, so things like DOI is digital object identifier, LCCN is Library of Congress control number, and other unique file names. You might want to also include keywords, so that could be controlled or uncontrolled vocabulary. Controlled would be like Library of Congress subject headings or genre form terms. And it might be good practice to include element fields for both controlled and uncontrolled vocabulary. For instance, you might have photographs with lots of local residents in them, and you might want to include their names so that they're searchable, but they won't have authority files. So you might want to include local subject headings as opposed to controlled Library of Congress subject headings or authority files. Excuse me, just a second. You might also want to include language of work if applicable, description and visual description. And the description might be sort of like the context of the work versus a visual description is just literally what the photograph looks like. Step 3 would be to create a metadata template. When dealing with even a small number of photographs to digitize, we highly recommend creating a metadata template. This not only helps you keep your data organized, but it serves as a backup if anything happens during the upload process. So some file formats you might want to include for your metadata template might be Excel spreadsheets, which is what I use, or Google Forms. I've heard of other people using Google Forms to collect their metadata. There are probably other formats as well. Those are just the two that I know the most about. And then you want to create a template for each individual photograph and record your metadata accordingly. And for compound objects, have 2 levels of metadata. They have the object level and item level. So object level would be like the whole work as the book, a whole book as a whole. And item level would be if you had individual page scans of that book. So you want to, for compound objects, you want to create a metadata template for the object level metadata. So that might have a file size that's much larger. Or a description that's different. And then you might want to have, and then you also want to have each page has its own item level scan as well. So just keep that in mind if you have a bigger work with multiple sections to it that you're going to want to do a compound object, and you want to include both the object level metadata and the item level metadata scan.
All right, so let's talk about after digitization and the stewardship of digital surrogates and original photos. So after going through all that work to digitize your photographs, continual stewardship and upkeep is vital for prolonging the life of your digitized photographs. Digitized media has its own preservation risks that are much different from the preservation risks of analog materials. For example, whatever storage hardware you select to house your digital materials in, such as a memory card or an external hard drive, is susceptible to physical damage and deterioration with time. Technological obsolescence is also a huge issue. Storage hardware goes out of date very quickly. Think floppy disks, for example. And information can get trapped and lost in obsolete technology if that information doesn't get migrated to a newer platform before the old platform goes extinct. The resolution quality of your photos can decrease over time with transfers, and files may become irreversibly corrupted due to bit loss. There are also more subtle ways digital information can become lost. Information being lost with staff turnovers or data mergers and consolidations. So while digitization remains an invaluable process, the digitization process alone doesn't guarantee the safety of your digital collection. The answer to maintaining your digital photographs is active digital stewardship. So the first steps of active digital stewardship is to make sure that you always have plenty of backups in case of a digital disaster, and keep at least one backup option in an alternate location far away in a different building in case of a natural physical disaster. Experts recommend that you make multiple backup copies of your digital collection and store the copies in multiple formats in multiple locations. An easy way to remember this is the photographer's 3-2-1 rule, which is make 3 copies, save the copies on at least 2 different storage devices, and save 1 in a different physical location. So while cloud storage is great, it's a very convenient digital location for storage, we don't recommend that you use it as your only storage option. Cloud companies can go out of business and take your data with them or change their terms of service suddenly before you're able to retrieve your files. So it's not a good idea to use cloud storage as your only backup option. And even if you do make several copies and utilize several storage strategies, those copies will still age. The risk for file corruption, bit loss, or obsolescence will only increase with time. Through either an automated preservation program or through manual efforts, it's suggested that you make new copies of your photographs and migrate the collection to a new technology or an improved storage container every 5 to 7 years. Maintaining accurate, high quality metadata is also extremely important. Please ensure that all your metadata is transferring correctly with each migration, and periodically double check that all of your links are still working. Also record important access information like save locations, passwords, etc. So other or future staff members can also. And finally, always keep the original photographs in case you need to redigitize. Stuff happens. Sometimes the only solution in a crisis is to simply redigitize. So if we're keeping all these original photographs, how should we properly store them and preserve them? So we can extend the life of our original photographs through active photograph preservation. The first thing to do when beginning an active preservation plan is to identify the type of photographs that you have in your collection. Different photographs may require slightly different preservation environments or rules of handling based on their unique chemistry. Photographic identification is also a vital part to the metadata process. The type of photograph that you have provides a ton of context to your image. It may give you clues as to the time period in which it was taken, the approximate cost of the photograph at the time it was taken, the purpose of the photograph. So identifying photos can be tricky sometimes, but it doesn't always have to be super hard. If you aren't able to consult a photography expert, there's a website called Graphics Atlas. They have an excellent tool to help you identify the kinds of photographs you might have in your collection. Next, store your materials in archival quality storage boxes whenever possible. Containers or photo albums made from acidic materials can damage your photographs over time. And most photos do best when they're laid flat in a box on a shelf for maximum support. But whether or not you're able to identify your photographs or afford archival quality storage materials, mitigating the top environmental risks is the biggest key to a long-lasting physical photograph collection. The goal of preservation is to actively mitigate the risk of damage and extend life, which is always preferable to trying to reverse some sort of damage after it happens due to a passive take preservation. So here are some environmental risks you should watch out for whenever you choose to store your photographs. First and foremost, light levels. All light is a danger to photographs and will accelerate their deterioration and cause them to fade. UV light from sunlight is the most harmful, but even artificial light can fade photographs over time. So try to keep your photos away from windows and doors and even artificial light sources whenever possible. Number 2 and 3 are temperature and relative humidity. Elevated temperature and humidity will accelerate the chemical breakdown of photographs, and they're also just an invitation for mold and pests to flourish. However, humidity levels that are too low can actually cause your photographs to become brittle as the moisture evaporates out of the photos. So finding the right balance is good, but consistency actually is the number one factor. Frequent or rapid fluctuations in temperature and humidity are far more damaging than maybe an extended exposure to a slightly higher temperature or humidity than ideal. So ideally, photographs should be stored at 70 degrees Fahrenheit or below, with relative humidity maintained at 30 to 50% and fluctuating less than 5% throughout. And finally, it's good to watch out for pollutants and pests. Air pollution, dust, and dirt can fade and abrade the surface of your photographs. Keeping your spaces clean and filtering your storage space's air is a great way to combat damage from pollutants. And pests can strike suddenly, and if they do strike, they can cause irreversible damage to your photographs. So experts always recommend to keep food away from your collections and just keep an eye out for signs of pests. Taking proactive measures to keep pests out of your storage space is a lot better than trying to retroactively deal with them when they arrive.
So in conclusion, we hope that we have adequately addressed the following topics today, as listed in our in summary screen. As aforementioned, the topic is broad and there are numerous methods to digitize a collection of analog photographs, but we hope that this gave you a crash course in the subject. We have included our works cited and additional resources at the end of this presentation. We do just want to kind of give a shout out. The CMC provides, in addition to cataloging original and copy cataloging, we also provide metadata services to Illinois libraries for free. If you would like assistance with that, please give me an email. I'm Katy at kegts@illinoisheartland.org. I'm always happy to help you with any questions or concerns you may have pertaining to the digitization creation of metadata for and the uploading of a digital collection into a digital library or repository. I also work with audiovisual collections and can provide audio transcriptions. Below here, we have some examples of the work that myself and previous metadata catalogers have worked on for various libraries in Illinois. And then here is the works cited page that we have. Here is our image sources for the few images we have throughout. And then here are some additional resources. So if you do have any questions, feel free to email me, but there are also fantastic resources here that, that really helped us in our path to create this presentation. So thank you so much for joining us. Does anyone have any questions at this time?
Katie, we don't have any yet. So if anybody has any questions, please post them in the chat box. Or if you can give me a hot second, I can let people unmute themselves and you can ask it if you have a microphone.
I'll just move us to this page here for you can see on this one.
Yep, and these are the CMC staff that are on the call today. Just to let you know, our next Online with the CMC will be September 8th at 10 a.m. and I can put the link in the chat box for that. It's going to be don't go changing the new 334, 340, and 563 mark fields. And remember that we have moved our Online with the CMCs to the second Thursdays and not to the third. Okay, while we're waiting for questions, if there are any, thanks Emily and Katie for a great presentation. You guys did a really good job. Okay, Kathleen says we are a small library and currently do not have a website. When we get one set up, is there anything to consider that so that we can link any digital collections we create?
That's a good question. So I guess it depends where you want to put your digital collection. Are you going to host it directly on your website, or are you planning to use a digital library like Content DM or Omeka, in which case you can always provide links on your website to those external digital libraries or repositories. If you're going to host it directly through your website, I would send me an email about that and we can talk more in depth about that. I'd need to do a little bit of research to know exactly what kind of questions would arise from that. But definitely if you're using an external digital repository or digital library, you can definitely link directly to, I've seen other libraries do that where they have links that go to an external library on their own website.
And Kathleen says, thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, Erica says, thank you for this presentation. Very thorough. What would you say is the most interesting or unique item that you have digitized?
I have not digitized any myself, actually. Let's see. I work with digital collections. That's my main job, is to work with libraries and their digital collections. I work with the Marshall Public Library right now, the New Lenox Library, and also Poplar Creek on various digital collections that they have. All of them have fantastic items. I'm trying to think of like the most unique item that I've worked with. Well, I think the ones that are the most exciting for me in a way are the compound objects, because it just provides, it's a lot more, it's kind of like stretching your legs when you're doing the work a bit. It really, you kind of have to dig in a lot further, and you have to have all your stuff, all your metadata templates and stuff like that set up ahead of time before uploading into, in our case, uploading into Content DM for the Illinois Digital Archives. So I enjoy compound objects because those are fun. One I did recently was a book about, it was called Black and White Together, and it was about race relations in New Lenox, Illinois. That was really exciting and interesting, and I had to read all the way through it because I had to make sure that it was a word searchable document. So it was just a really interesting document to read through. Everything that comes through here, though, is really interesting because it's all historical. It all pertains to Illinois for the most part. I'm trying to think if there's any other weird things that I've dealt with. I've also only been in this position since February, so there might be other items that predecessors have worked with too. We also work with audio files too, so hearing the recordings of various individuals from local communities is also really interesting. And just kind of fun to get to know them and sort of tangentially get to know them and the lives that they lived in Illinois.
Okay, and Linda Johnson just says, thanks, Katie and Emily. Great information.
Thanks, Linda.
Okay, Jennifer says, we have a large local history collection. Is that the kind of thing that we could upload to something like the Illinois Digital Archives? We're still working on creating digital files.
Absolutely, yeah. The only concern is that you'd want to make sure that you have permissions, either rights yourself as the library to those works or from the creators of those works. I know that the Illinois Digital Archives does require that you have permissions for all items that you upload, but absolutely, yeah. If it's local history, the Illinois Digital Archives would love to work with you on that, or I would love to work with you on that and get that up into the Illinois Digital Archives.
Yeah, so Jennifer, if you want to just contact Katie and maybe share some more information with her. And yes, the state library would love to have more collections in Ida. So
yeah, and there's some fantastic collections in there because we're not the only ones who upload to it, obviously. And there are, there's just so many cool and interesting historical pieces there. You can get lost in there for days.
Go down the rabbit hole and maybe never come back out. Okay, she said she'll contact you next week when she's not on vacation. Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Oh, have fun on your vacation.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Remember, you can unmute yourself if you have a microphone, or you can put your question in the chat box. Anna just said, wonderful presentation. Linda asked, do you have to be a library to use IDA? What about local historical societies?
That I don't know about it. I'm not sure actually. Do you know, Pam, if you have to be an actual library?
I don't think you do. I think if there's a local historical society, they could contact the Illinois State Library and get an account and get that set up for them.
Yeah, that's what I was leaning towards, but I didn't want to absolutely say that without being sure.
Well, I
know that they want as many collections up as possible because it's our digital history of Illinois. So
for sure. And Eric says, great job, Katie and Emily. You both sounded like experts to me.
Thanks, Eric.
And Melody says, thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you, Melody.
Okay, so any other questions?
And again, feel free to email me or the CMC email. The CMC email is up there. My email is again just K and then EGTS, my last name, at illinoisheartland.org. Especially if you have any project ideas that you'd like my assistance with. I'm always excited by new projects.
And we don't have Emily's email up there because she's almost finished with her internship. So I don't know that she'd want you contacting her once it's over. Maybe she would. Okay, so Barb says, great job. Sarah says, thanks so much. This was full of great info. And then Blake says, I believe the permissions are the most important part. Any organization like a church, community center, etc., with proper permissions for uploading collection appropriate materials can upload to IDA. Yes, Blake, I believe that is true. Yeah. And then Kathleen, will we be getting the slides and recording? Sorry if I missed this earlier. I probably forgot to say it. Yes, so usually the recording is done within a day or two, and then I'll send an email out to anybody registered in L2 with the link to the YouTube recording.
And the slides are up in L2 right now, but the slides with our notes will be uploaded immediately after this presentation.
Yep. And that's just our normal procedure. We have somebody else who does the recording to YouTube, so we just kind of have to wait on them to get that done. Okay, any other questions? Going. All right, well, I was just thank Katy and Emily once again for their presentation and for all the hard work on this presentation. Bobby Pearman says thank you. Okay, thanks
Bobby.
guys. I hope you all will join us in September.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.